I want to turn your attention today to Ecclesiastes chapter 3. Ecclesiastes chapter 3. While you're finding that, we recognize that patience is required for many beautiful things, isn't it? There was a quick example from early in my ministry. Those of you that know Jed Morley, it would have been his great uncle, I think. Rod Morley, and he lived near where I first pastored, my very first church, and he was an amazing man, and I'd go there, spend quite a little while with him, but he had one of the many interesting things at his place. He had, I think maybe it was to scale, but he had this little cabin. I think maybe even cedar shake shingles, just little tiny things he had cut out and put together on the roof. Just an amazing thing. Attention to detail and all the rest there. I can't remember if it was actually a replica of a certain house or not. Maybe a cabin that he knew of in real life, or I guess it was all in real life, but in the full scale. But just would be hard to grasp. He may have told me about how long it took. I don't remember what it was, but how long such work would have taken. It would require such patience, and perseverance would have seemed, at least to me, to be tedious and just not for the faint of heart, I'm sure. I'm sure there are a number of other examples of that type of patience required. You have famous works of art like the Sistine Chapel. I think that took about 4 years. Even the Mona Lisa was, of course, painted by Leonardo da Vinci, and I think that took something like 16 years for him to actually complete. I think not so long ago, Mount Rushmore came up as well. I maybe made reference to that, and that was something like 14 years, actually spanning into the Son. The Father beginning it and then the Son completing it. And just so many things require patience, don't they? There might be great beauty involved at the end of the story, but the problem is it takes so long to get there. And it seems natural for us humans to be impatient for progress, isn't it? But it does often take time. And today we see one particular verse, but we're going to read 3 of them. But Ecclesiastes chapter 3 and verse number 11 is our text today. Ecclesiastes 3 and verse 11. He hath made everything beautiful in his time. Also he hath set the world in their heart, so that no man can find out the work that God maketh from the beginning to the end. I know that there is no good in them, but for a man to rejoice and to do good in his life, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. It is the gift of God. So today I want to just spend just a little bit of time here talking about beautiful things. And obviously we notice that beauty comes from God. We start looking, again, we've already talked about some of the time involved in something to become beautiful, but obviously that does apply to spiritual things as well. And some of you that know the old saying, I've mentioned it so many times, and I just this weekend shared a little bit about that with a new fella there at the youth convention, that you don't stare up the stairs, you just step up the steps. Sometimes God is wanting to take us to a new level, but for us, we feel like, it's so far, I can't make it that far. And yet he wants us just to take it one step at a time. Keep being patient while he makes even us as unworthy and as maybe it's not a word, but unbeautiful as we are. He can make us what he wants us to be. And I know sometimes maybe it's in ourselves, maybe it's in other people, but we sometimes struggle with impatience as God keeps doing that work, don't we? Maybe it's looking in our own selves. Hopefully that's where our main focus is. But we look into ourselves and we think, oh, Lord, I've got to work on this area, and I've got struggles in that area, and I'm not really all that I want to be. And maybe others looking on might think, oh, wow, you're really doing great things for God, and God's really using you. But we ourselves, we might feel like, oh, Lord, I'm impatient. As you keep working on me, please help me to let you make me the beautiful person, the saint of God that you want me to be. And yes, God did great things even in the creation. He does it year after year in the seasons. Well, hopefully before too long, I've seen some daffodils and little crocuses poking their head out a little bit, I guess, or at least maybe not the bud, but at least the beginning of it, the little shoots just coming out of the ground there. But anyway, we see God do it in nature. And yet, and I guess if we're fair, we'd say, well, sometimes we get impatient about that too, especially from winter to spring, where we're at right now. But we do grow impatient with his timing, even in us. And again, sometimes we may even become despondent over the very outlook of the situation just because it seems like it takes so long and I don't learn my lessons, or I need to do better, I need to grow, I need to be more what he wants me to be. But one thing to remember here is that actually beauty may not always be seen the same at a given time. We may grow frustrated at the course of life, and we struggle a little bit with what God's maybe doing in us. And yet one day we may likely look back and we may recognize that beauty. That right now we may not see it, but one day we may look back on it and it actually does mean something. It just depends on the given time. Whereas in the moment it may feel like this is frustrating, but then someday we can look back and realize that even circumstances that we might have resisted at the time, things we didn't like at the time, really couldn't have been done any better for our good. And it's important to recognize God is working out beauty even in your life and mine in his own time. I want to just touch on 3 things quickly here this morning, and hopefully just be good for us just to think about. I'm not going to take very long, but I just want to focus on it for a few moments. The first thing, we're just going to kind of work our way through this, and the first thing we find there in verse 11 is just simply the word he. And I want to talk to you just for a little bit here about the artist who is God. The artist who is God. You know, I've watched some amazing works of art, seemed almost beyond belief. It's amazing things we can find these days on YouTube or some other maybe social media or whatever. But I saw a man one time. In fact, I've seen different versions maybe of it, but I saw a man paint what seemed to be a rather strange picture. I think maybe it was sort of a speed painting or something, and he's just flying through it, and you can't really see what's happening. And then I believe it was that at the end, he threw some sort of glitter or dust of some sort on it, and he flipped it over, and suddenly, what looked like it was strange became somebody we could recognize. And amazing. I don't think it took him very long, and I don't know all the details there, but you could find a variety of different versions, again, of that. But it just was astounding at the time. And the simple fact for us is that we can't always see how anything beautiful could come out of what we're seeing in our lives. If we're looking at it, we don't see it as God sees it. Another little example, and I forget now exactly if it was Michelangelo or one of those sculptors who was asked about doing these great works and just basically said, I just chip away everything that doesn't look like what I want it to be. And I suppose that might be a very simplified version, but really, God just keeps working on us. God keeps doing things in our lives, and he is the one who has the end view in mind. We can't see what we would become. We might feel like nothing beautiful could come out of our situation. Or maybe it's not necessarily art, but even one we're familiar with, somebody that we know, and you think, I don't know how they could ever really be anything for God, or anything good could come out of their situation. But then you have the key factor of this verse, and that is simply he. He's the one doing the artwork. He is the one making things beautiful in his time. He is the one who keeps chiseling away at our character, our spirit, the various weights or the difficulties in our lives those issues that we struggle with. He's dealing with all of those things in his own good time. And he knows exactly how to bring about beauty. Our problem sometimes is that we fail to trust the one, the only one, who can truly make things beautiful in our lives. Are you willing to trust him? He's the artist. He's the sculptor, if you want to use that analogy. Our life may sometimes seem to be a continual winter with no spring, but God intends to bring the beauty of spring in your life and mine. The artist. The second one I noticed with you is the accomplishment. And that's just a little bit further there. He hath made everything beautiful. The accomplishment. What God has in mind. Maybe we could just focus a little bit on the beauty, even as it as is maybe related to in Romans 8:28. And some of you may be very familiar with that. It's pretty common. But let me just, I'll read it to you in case some of you may not be quite as familiar. Romans 8:28 says, and we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. It reminds us right there that God can make all things work together for good. For beauty, we might say, if we go back to Ecclesiastes. Does that mean that everything is going to just be beautiful or look beautiful as it comes to us? Can we always see what God is doing in our lives? Can we see the beauty? No, not always. Sometimes we really struggle to see what God is wanting to do in us. We struggle to recognize how that situation in my life, that thorn in the flesh, that trouble that I'm facing, how any of it could be for good. And yet God is accomplishing beauty. It works toward an end result that's pleasing and beautiful, whether it looks beautiful at the time or not. One other issue that we should remember is the judge of beauty. Of course, it's partly the divine artist, of course, but we need to remember that others may see the beauty more than we easily see it. Sometimes we look at the trial we're facing. I refer to it as the thorn. We think of that with Paul. Paul had the thorn in the flesh. He asked God to remove it. God simply said, my grace is sufficient for thee. So we sometimes refer to those trying times that way. But what for us, we're dealing with right here in the moment. It may be that others looking on see already the sweetness, the mellowness, maybe, the humility that's coming about because of that problem. And so what we see as ugly and harsh and hard, others may even see that circumstance as a blessing. One example could be maybe Fanny Crosby. We sing her hymns and we enjoy it. We appreciate it. So much good there. And yet if you know anything much about her story, you know she was blind. You could kind of find some of that even in her hymns. Some reference to someday being able to see in heaven and see her Savior first of all, I think was one of them. That kind of thing. And though she seemed to come to a sweet acceptance of it, she recognized that God was able to use her blindness. But you understand that we sing those songs and we rejoice and we worship because of what she experienced, when at the time she may, of course, maybe some days felt on cloud nine, God's really helping her. But many days, I'm sure it was difficult. It was a trial. So you understand there's a difference in who's looking, who's judging. Obviously, we know God is the judge. We're living, we're being molded for his pleasure. But even other people may be able to see the beauty that God brings out of ashes, where it's a little tough sometimes for us to get past the ashes, past the trials that we face to see the beauty. But God is bringing about an accomplishment. He's the artist who accomplishes beauty in us. One more thing quickly. Let's notice the arrangement. The artist accomplishes beauty in his time. The arrangement is according to his time. Again, our impatience chafes at the delay, doesn't it? We struggle with the wait, the long period here. But in God's time, we are personally made into his image. We are being cultivated to be beautiful in his sight. Of course, the same thing applies to other people, that sometimes we might get a little bit, I don't know if I should say frustrated, but we just get a little weary with that situation. We get a little weary with that person who maybe it seems like it's taking so long, I suppose maybe it's a little hard to appreciate that unless you've been in this situation. But sometimes you just feel like, oh Lord, can't you help this person or that person? Maybe it's a family member, maybe it's a neighbor, maybe it's somebody else that and yet you're affected by the trial. You're affected by the problem there. But our job is not to make the changes in others or to determine the speed of the operation. But God is working out His plan. He's creating beauty where maybe so often we only see unpleasantness. But it's in His time. And God is not, obviously He can do great transformations, and please understand, I want you to really recognize this. Maybe I need to just clarify this, that unless you've been born again, you cannot grow into godliness. In some cases, people may expect, well, I just need to mature, I just need to grow. But if you've not been born again, if you've not been transformed by the grace of God, don't expect just to keep growing to be like Christ. You have to have a birth. You have to have you might say, the new birth. You can't just grow into this. Growth does happen after a new life begins, but you got to start right. You got to have that life really going on, that new birth happening, because growth doesn't change a dead person into a living one. Growth happens after we're alive. And so don't misunderstand that. We do grow in as God works on us, but we have to have that new birth. So understand that difference. But then recognize that after that, when so often we may grow frustrated, or we feel like, oh, I need to do better. I need to be growing faster. I need God to help me to mature quicker. But don't forget that He is working, and He is in His time making us beautiful. Transforming the sinner to saint. Don't give up on the growth. Just let Him lead you as He wants to, in His timing and according to His purpose. We can become beautiful in His sight. It's very, very simple. We have an artist who is accomplishing great things in us, but it's according to His arrangement in His time. I know there may be many things that we can't understand in life, such as why it just seems that evil prevails or good men suffer. But in the end, in the midst of all the thorns, in the midst of all the trials that we face, we can see at the end, at least, I believe we'll see how God has been making us beautiful in His sight. In nature, of course, we're currently on the verge, just right here. It's starting to kind of pretty up a little bit, and we're ready to see one of the more beautiful times of the year as we see God's handiwork come through again. But we've had to go through the winter. And really, I believe I've seen it even maybe as a church, but also in maybe even on our own personal lives, we may see that after sort of a winter process, a time of dreariness maybe, of feeling a little frustrated, we can be brought through to spring again. Brought out of the barren times to a place of beauty in our own souls. And so let's just allow Him to bring beauty. Even this spring, let's begin asking, our revival's just not far off here. Let's begin asking Him, Lord, would you find it time to make me beautiful? Help me to mature. Help me to grow. Help these trials that I face. Even maybe the coldness in my life, the desolate parts of my life, may it bring forth to spring, to beauty, to your will. And so let's ask God to help us, even today, to wait for the artist. In His time, He'll make us beautiful in His sight.